I'm doing an entire series called The Future of the Vikings. I do it every year at the end of the season and look at every single position, the biggest questions, how people performed this year by the numbers and so forth, and what the storylines might be going forward. And I wonder from you guys, aside from the quarterback, which I wrote today at our free website, scorenorth.com, aside from the quarterback, what would be the position that is at the top of your list that you have the most questions about, that you really want to know? How is this going to play out? How are they going to fix this? How are they going to change this? What are they going to do? What is the first one, Judd, that comes to your mind?
Okay, this one is not a issue as far as a problem goes, but it's going to be a problem of what to do here, because I'm convinced you can't pay both guys what they either are making currently or deserve. The safety position. What do you do there? Harrison Smith is a great player. He's 30. He's been a great player, but he's paid really, really well. And I think you need, if you have one great safety, that's awesome. Two great safeties to me is a luxury, especially when the guys around them, the cornerbacks, are disintegrating. Right. So and I looked it up today, I believe Anthony Harris is 28. Do you pay Harris and either get Harrison Smith to take a pay cut or jettison him? Or if Anthony Harris, because I think he's going to get paid, if somebody comes along and says, we're signing him, do you say, well, we're invested in Harrison Smith. We love him. Too bad. That's the one, because I don't think you can have two guys playing safety who are going to be paid as much as those two are by somebody in 2020.
How do you think they'll handle it, Alex?
I think that they're going to have to pay Anthony. I think you're right. I think when you have one great safety dude, that's awesome. But when you can have two, and Anthony doesn't get a lot of respect, but he should, because he led the league in interceptions with Stephon Gilmore and Tre'Davious White. And what that means to opposing quarterbacks and how that can shut down the field. And then you have the box player in Harrison Smith. I mean, dude, come on. That is too – I mean, that's like a step above the Legion of Boom almost, in my opinion. Because, dude, with Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor, remember them back then? Those guys were ferocious. God, they were ball hawks too, and they weren't afraid to stick their nose in and get physical with people. Like, that's what makes defenses so tough. And people don't know this, but offensive line and quarterbacks read a defense by their safeties. Mm-hmm. The more your safety can keep to himself, like two great safeties that Minnesota has, makes it so much harder on us to be like, all right, where's it coming from? Because you see it all the time. Harry's down at the line at the last second. There comes Anthony and Harry, and they're rolling, and you're like, dude, that's – and people don't realize how ballsy that is to do it at the snap, because you have to be sometimes in the middle of the field and you got to run from the line of scrimmage and you got to get all the way back there. Like, that is tough to do. And and a lot of teams don't pick up on that right away. And that's why this defense starts just crashing down on you, and they don't even have to do it with a blitz.
So I have two big questions here about Anthony Harris in this situation. Number one is, how would they make the space to sign people?
That's my question. How can you pay them both?
I have overthecap.com up right now, which is where you can find all the Vikings salaries, and team cap space is negative $5.4 million.
We're negative, guys. We're negative.
Yeah, people say the show needs to stop being so negative. How about the cap situation? Ooh. That'll show them. So we know that Xavier Rhodes is probably going to be gone. And if they just straight up cut him, you can earn maybe around $8 million, if I'm doing the quick math fast here. You can restructure Linval Joseph. You can cut Riley Reif if you want to. There's another $8-9 million. You can move on from Everson Griffin if he opts out, or I think you could just straight up cut him. And so you can create a bunch of cap space here by removing mostly good players from the roster, which you try not to do, or restructuring. But I'm not sure that it opens up enough cap space for what Anthony Harris should want. Like you mentioned, he led the NFL in interceptions. This wasn't a guy who was just a nice little product of what Harrison Smith was doing. The best safeties in the league are getting around $15 million. That's what he should be asking for. Tyrann Mathieu, $14 million a year. Landon Collins, who, wow, that turned out to be a bust. Eddie Jackson, those guys are getting Earl Thomas about $14 to $15 million a year. So you're talking about a salary cap hit that'll be even higher for Anthony Harris if you pay him market value than someone like Xavier Rhodes is right now. And then you also have to sign other guys for the future as well, like potentially your quarterback, potentially your running back. And there's only so many guys that you could just send off the island and still have a decent football team. Harris is one of the tougher ones. I would also factor this in too, that a lot of guys signed team-friendly deals when they thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. No one should think they're going to win the Super Bowl now, right? And so if you're Anthony Harris, you're saying, well, why should I take the Kendricks deal that was super team friendly at the time? Why should I take the Hunter deal that was team friendly at the time when, we're just kind of another team that's pretty good, but not great?
You shouldn't, especially if you're not going to be able to hit free agency. I mean, when you hit free agency, look at the Landon Collins deal. Like, that is proof right there of what free agency does. You get overpaid. It is incredible, like, what happens. And so if you're Anthony, you're like, hey, man, listen, I don't take a team-friendly deal because you're right. We had a nice window going, and now we're not sure if that window's closed, where we are, but I know that I am extremely important to that window. So now you're going to have to pay me like it. And I think that when you look at this, you're like, dude, there are some guys that are going to have to come way down. And it's part of the process too, and you have to wonder how many guys are going to say no. Nah, man, this isn't.
Well, right, because
Is
I
it
thought
worth taking less?
I thought we saw it with the way Kyle Rudolph handled his situation last summer, where 2 years ago, coming off that 2017, there was just such a good feeling from everybody. Yeah, we'll sign our deals. Like, get me locked up. I'm not sitting out. We want to go win the Super Bowl. Even Terrence Newman tried to come back that year because he thought, well, we've got a chance to win the Super Bowl in 2018. I want to keep playing.
Terrence tried to come back again.
I know.
2 weeks ago.
Terrence. That's why he wouldn't answer our calls. But last year, Rudolph was much more, ornery about his deal.
He flat out said, I'm not taking a pay cut.
That's right. And I think that was a sign of things to come with the way that players are going to handle this. So if you go to Linval Joseph and you say, hey, man, we could cut you, he might say, all right, well, somebody else will sign me. So if you want to do that, go ahead. And the same thing with any of these guys who could restructure. Riley Reif would be one of them. And these deals are just starting to add up. They have here, I don't know, almost a dozen players who are making over $9 million. And eventually you have to do something there. There's obvious cuts like Shamar Stephan is making over $5 million. You can move on from him, but you have to replace these guys.
More importantly, from their aspect, there has to come a time that you pay for last springtime, and you tell people in that building who like these players, sorry, we can't do it.
Yeah.
At some point in time, you've got to say to a Anthony Barr type of guy, we can't afford you. Sorry. Just leave. Just go somewhere else. You're going to get paid.
With him, he can't. With his
situation. But I'm saying Anthony Harris is a really good player, right?
Yeah.
But he's the type of guy that you're going to eventually have to say, we just can't do this. Sorry. Like, you're going to get paid too much by, take your pick, Pittsburgh. They're going to pay you a ton. We can't do that.
Man, who's playing safety then?
That's right. And
who's playing the corners?
Who's playing corners? Like, that's.
I'm more worried about the corners, guys.
Well, I agree with you, but I think that if you could keep the safeties intact, they're going to make up more in a Zimmer defense in the long run. Because what is it all about? It's all about being exotic. It's all about being the next guy to come up with the next greatest defense. And what does that entail? Your safeties being on point. Like, there's times where you can let your cornerbacks be like zone. Hey, we're going to go zone. But the safeties, that's what you need. You need those guys to always be on point because they are your last defense. They're your most important, discrete weapons on the field. And when you have guys like a Harrison Smith who's not afraid to body anybody up,
right?
Like, I would put Harrison Smith in the category of, I bet he could decleat Derrick Henry. If Harrison Smith got pissed off enough and was moving fast enough, he could take out Derrick Henry by himself. Like, that is just not seen. Dude, Earl Thomas, we saw him get spun around in circles. Right. Like, this is what you need. You need a good defense. And right now they're going to be hurting. You can to your point, you can let a Linval go because you have guys behind him who are willing to step up. You can let a Shamar go. Dude, their defensive line depth is incredible. Like, the guys that they roll in there, Stephen Weatherly, those guys have stepped up in a huge way. They've come.
He's another free agent, so he might end up going too.
And now you're starting to run into problems. Like, when your guys that are depth players that are like really filling major roles, like, those are the guys that you're like, hey, listen, we get it. Anthony's important to us, but so is he, because he is a backup player that comes in. Guys she's just a backup. I mean, he comes out with like 5 sacks. You're like, dude, that's big.
But Boone, my point is this: I'm letting you pick one. If you're Mike and you come to me and I'm Rick or Rob, I'm not saying that both those safeties are gone. What I'm saying is this is the time now, unlike a year ago, where you have to tell me which one you want. You can't have both. I'm allowing you to keep one. I just can't pay two guys that much in my current cap hell.
So you're saying I can only keep one safety?
I'm saying you can keep one.
No matter who I tell you can cut. Like, if I'm like, yo, I'll let you cut Linval. you would be like, dude, I can only keep one safety.
I need help on both sides of the football. That's my problem.
I would tell you that you got to keep. I would tell you that you got to keep Harry.
All right.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Or you could quit.
Yeah, you can just
Or
walk
I'm
away.
out of here.
If you're Mike, you can
Is
quit
that a
on
real
me
choice?
too.
'Cause I would.
So,
I'd be like,
I'll
dude,
call a
listen.
press conference.
At this moment, we could be talking about this team really having to rely on a lot of young players that might not be ready to step in. I mean, even at left tackle, if they decide to cut Riley Reif, it was a solid season for him, but you're talking about making $9 million on the cap by letting him go. So if you had to cut him and then move Brian O'Neill to left tackle, then you have to move somebody else into right tackle. Right now, that guy is Oli Udo, which, whatever. He hasn't played much at all to be able to say whether he can actually play or not. And you might be talking about someone like Armin Watts having to step in and be your nose tackle, replacing Linval Joseph, which is a huge problem. As much as Armin Watts showed something at times when he was asked to fill in, you're not talking about a Pro Bowl caliber player. Even if he doesn't have 100% of what he had a few years ago, Linval is still an intimidating force. And even if Everson Griffin goes, you might be talking about having to have a Fadi Adenabo play that role, which means all the time he's rushing the passer, not just on third down and long, and not just cleaning up the messes that are created by Everson and by Danielle Hunter. And that's where if you have to get rid of all these guys who are good, proven NFL players just to get under the salary cap, just to fill out your defensive secondary with another safety and two more corners and so forth, that's where it gets very hard to do the math on this team. It's like we all knew at some point the check was going to come. Right. And you just kept ordering food and eating the food and having a good time. And today,
and Brzezinski did a great job too. Rob did an outstanding job
to open the window this long.
He prolonged the meal as long as you possibly could.
He still might be able to too, though. Like that's the thing is you're not talking about like, hey, listen, there's ways around this restructuring. We're going to work around this. I looked at the offensive line free agents, and it's like, listen, we might have to keep Riley. Okay, we might have to roll with that because you talk about some of these dudes, like the only dude that's really on that list is like a Ryan Conklin. And if you were to get rid of Riley, you'd have to move Brian over to left, and then you'd have to bring Ryan in to play right. And even that's going to cost you a fortune. Like these old linemen are expensive, and you start talking about how to make. Now, don't get me wrong. There's ways that they can do it. There's hard ways and there's easy ways. And I think that as long as the team is still on the collective, hey, we're still on the rise, we can still do this. There's going to be an easy way to get it done. The problem becomes if everyone looks around and goes, hey, listen, the window's kind of closed, and I'm not willing to give up my spot. So let's play hardball here. And that's when you start wondering who's prepared to play hardball, because it's easy to be like, oh, yeah, I'll go to war. But when the team's calling you and they're like, hey, man, thought we were going to do this together, and you're like, well, I'm upset and I'm pissed at you and this isn't right. They're going to be like, really? Because we're kind of pissed at you too. Like this can go both ways. And that's when things start getting tricky, and that's when a team can really come unfolded that people don't see, behind the scenes.
Yeah, and with Rudolph's deal last year, it started to get a little bit tense between the two sides because it was clear that Rudolph still looked at himself as a star tight end, and he saw them draft another tight end as a sign of them telling him, yeah, we're going to replace you, which of course he needs to be realistic about because of his age, but doing it when his contract was up. Irv Smith's a good player, but he looked like or came across as if he felt that they were doing it to put pressure on him to sign, an easier deal for them. And ultimately, he did sign a fairly team-friendly deal, but he's just another one of those players as evidence that the Vikings decided if you were on the 2017 team, we want you here, and we're going to pay what it takes to keep you here. We're going to make sure that you get deals that have a lot of cash your way that comes from the ownership, because there are some deals that look like they're bigger than they actually appear, and they don't actually pay the guy as much cash. But with the Wilfs, they're always willing to put the cash down. So even if it's not the highest cap hit, it's a lot of cash in your pocket. Now, this relates to the quarterback situation as well. And I wrote about this for our website, scorenorth.com, about the future of the quarterback position and signing Cousins to a contract extension. You're already in a pretty tough spot here with the salary cap. You have a lot of players who are getting older, players you might jettison, players who might leave in free agency, like Anthony Harris, Mackenzie Alexander, and so forth. Now, if you're talking about extending Kirk, something that we have not really discussed, it's been mostly about how he played. But something we haven't really discussed is the franchise's trajectory over the next, say, 5 years. If that's the type of deal you're talking about signing Cousins to, is a 5-year extension, well, what is the trajectory over the next 5 years? A lot of times you have to go backwards a little bit to go forwards, which doesn't mean tanking, but it might mean that you're 7-9 or you're 6-10 for a year or two, or that's the caliber of team that you're putting out there and hoping that Kirk makes you better, unlikely considering who he is. Would that influence you guys if you were trying to be as realistic as possible about where you'll be? If you were saying, you know what, in the next 3 years, it's probably not our window, how much would that influence your decision on whether to keep Kirk?
Oh, that'd be huge. I think if you're saying that as a team, you're saying our window is closed, do we extend Kirk?
Yeah,
Is that your question?
I'm asking how much you factor it in. Like, do you look at him in a bubble and say, well, look, he's a good quarterback, he's hard to replace. You just don't get like the 5th best quarterback in the NFL by quarterback rating just off the shelf. And lots of guys bust. But if you're looking at the rest of the roster saying, well, you know what? There might need to be some patience within that next contract, though, because we got to restock this cupboard around Kirk. Would that influence whether you decide to keep him or not?
Yes, I think it does. I think that when you're looking at Kirk, you're saying, here's a guy who, by all measures, can put up some really nice games, but when is tested and, hit often, things change. I think that you have to free up some money. You're going to have to find a way to do. I mean, with Kirk's deal, I feel like I would want to see it. I might be the only one out here, but I feel like I want to see another year. Don't you? Aren't you like, you know what? I'm willing to roll the dice on this, Kirk. If you go out and have a monster year and you go out and you take us all the way, we'll give you exactly what you want. But if you don't, this is where we will separate ties because we are not going to go down this rabbit hole for as many years as everybody else did. It can't just be the same old thing every year. Yeah, we beat up on the really crappy teams, but when a good team comes into town, we kind of sputter out a little bit. Like it's got to be no. He took the reins that year, and that was the year that proved to everybody that he was prepared to go to the next step. It's like, with Dak. Dak's just falling into a really good spot because he is falling into free agency right now. But you look at last year, and you're like, man, he had some great numbers, but they didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like what are you paying for a quarterback to not win games for that? He's here to win the big games. That's what the quarterback does. I thread the needle, baby. I make it sweet. If you can't do that, why are we paying you $200 million